Hello, everyone. I'm Hailey. I'm a registered clinical counselor. I am happy to welcome you all to today's YouTube Live. I'm going to be talking about this idea of from scared to empowered, tips to overcoming health anxiety. So anxiety is definitely something that I feel quite connected to, whether it's professionally or personally. I can definitely relate to some of these symptomologies that we're going to be talking about today. I will be making some jokes, so please feel free to just know that these are some jokes. I'm just making light of it, but this is still a very real concern for many individuals. And so I wanted to first talk about what is health anxiety, symptoms of health anxiety, and then really go into some great tips and ideas around how to better manage the health anxiety. So I see people slowly joining in the chat. Hello, welcome. I'm glad to have you. As always, feel free to ask any questions as we go along or make any comments. And I really love that interaction piece. So first, let's talk about health anxiety. So anxiety, first of all, is that overactivation of the nervous system in response to something that we're fearing. And so what I mean by that is our nervous system is designed to keep us safe. And when we've had experiences where we have felt unsafe, our anxiety will step up and go, oh, that's dangerous. That's not okay. So now if we pair that with health, it's quite possible that many individuals who are challenged or suffering from health anxiety have maybe had some uncomfortable health experiences in the past, which then kind of grows and manifests into this anxiety state where we're really fearing the well-being of ourselves. So most of the time, fearing our physical health or biological health. So health anxiety was previously titled hypochondria. And so now it's called health anxiety because sometimes what happens in society is that we need to relabel different concerns to broaden the definition or be more inclusive of the symptomologies and experiences of people. Plus, I think that hypochondria sometimes gets like a bit of a bad rap and we don't fully understand what that is. So in the current DSM, it is now the umbrella of health anxiety. So health anxiety is the obsessive and irrational worry about having a medical concern, and usually mostly around physical or biological health. And so the key words there is obsessive. So it's going to be that very much that cyclical experience, in and out, can't quite not stop thinking about it, really hyper-focused on the fear or the worry or the possibility of something bad happening. And irrational is kind of an interesting word because many times we may feel like when we're in that state of health anxiety that we have factual evidence to back up our health anxiety. So we may feel like it's really true, but most of the times it's irrational because there doesn't actually end up being anything physically wrong with our bodies. So if you think about it, we can look back into our histories personally if you're struggling with health anxiety. So health anxiety is something that I will tease myself for a little bit today because sometimes I am a little bit worried. So for example, recently a close family member of mine had a little bit of case of Miss Rona, and I was constantly checking myself. Do I have a fever? Am I okay? Like really obsessing and worrying about it, even though I did not have anything and I actually didn't have any symptomology of having the virus. And so the reason that I did that is because I have an important desire to show up well professionally for clients and for my different roles as a clinical counselor. And so it's very important for me to be healthy and well. And so that pressure in many ways was well, I better be aware. I don't want to have anyone else be sick because of me. And so there's all of that desire to show up in certain ways. And so that's where that obsessive thinking was coming around. Do I have a fever? Do I have a sore throat? Am I feeling okay? Am I more tired than usual? Am I hot? Or is it just the fact that it's 30 degrees Celsius here in BC right now? So it's just kind of interesting because we kind of start to think about things in a certain way. And what we notice starts to manifest into maybe some symptoms where we think, oh, I definitely have that symptom happening. And it kind of is the powerful connection of the mind and body producing that experience. So I also can relate back to that. I've always had a bit of a discomfort with getting a needle, and it's something that's very common. It's a bit more of a phobia, but not a full-blown phobia for me personally, but just a bit of discomfort. And so if I look back in my own personal history, I can recognize a moment where my sibling and I were going to get the vaccination to go traveling in Mexico so that the water would be better to be drinkable. And I remember that my sibling went first and had the vaccination and unfortunately fainted. And so in that moment as a young, I think I was maybe like 12 or 13 years old at that time, I was like, whoa, whoa, like I definitely don't want to get this needle. And that irrational fear of needles came about for me in some ways because I saw that needle as something that was dangerous to me by seeing someone firsthand faint. But really, the fainting is something that's very normal. It's that vagal body reaction where the body goes, whoa, what is this? What's going on? Uncomfortable situation. Let's just shut down. But it actually had nothing to do at all with that, like vaccination to travel. But from that moment onwards, my mind made that uncomfortable link that thought thing with like the needles are dangerous. And so anytime I'd have to get a blood test or normal things with throughout life, I would always be a little bit like overly cautious or uncomfortable and always be joking, like I need to lie down if I'm going to get my blood taken and things like that, which is totally fair and fine. And that's a great coping skill. But what I'm getting at here is sometimes our past previous experiences create unhelpful associations and unhelpful, fearful associations that stimulate maybe some health anxiety that we have currently today. And so that's where the irrational piece comes from, is that it's why, like in many ways, it's like our past is still affecting us today presently, but there is actual no danger presently at the moment. Another kind of theory around why health anxiety comes up is that we have too much stress. So a lot of the time, and I've seen this in some statistics before, that a lot of our health concerns as humans that we have physically comes from stress. Like our body is meant to deal with stress, but if we have too much stress, then we can end up having a lot of physiological symptoms. So that physiological symptoms, then we can go, wait, I'm noticing this about my body. Is that okay? Things like that. And it really kind of manifests these different physiological symptoms. Noticing in the chat, Amanda saying is that my step grandma and stepmom and uncle have all been diagnosed with cancer in the last 2 years. And I've also been stressed and my health anxiety went through the roof. I think that's like, sounds like a really, really tough experience to have so many family members in such a short period of time being diagnosed with such. And so she's noticing there that health anxiety is coming up. And you make such a great point. If individuals around us, especially individuals we really care about, are not well, we're more likely then to be reflective of wait, like, how am I doing? How am I going to manage the stress that people that I care about are not well? Since there's a genetic component, is it possible that I could be unwell? So we start to make those associations and links, but we have to remember that the other people's bodies are separate than from our own bodies. And it doesn't mean that just because someone else is unwell, that we are unwell, but it's very normal for our brains to go, what are the similarities between that person's experience and mine? And in many ways, that's a form of empathy as well, to be like, well, what is the experience like for that person? And how is it similar to my experience that I could have? And how are we connected, right? And Amanda also shares that I've never had health anxiety before, and it's so strange. And yeah, I would assume as such, because it's something that we don't always have. It's not like a normal form of anxiety. It's not like a fear of flying or traveling or something like that, or a fear of spiders. It's like a fear of our well-being, right? Like, and I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble, but like we're all going to unfortunately pass away at one point, right? And that will be the end of our individual experiences. And so that is a really real outcome that we're all going to have. And so with anxiety, it does a great job at spinning it around and going, be careful of that possible end of our lives. And so let's be really cautious and concerned of like how to avoid that happening and have that be as far away in the future as possible, right? So especially something like cancer, so many people in the world are affected by cancer in one way or the other. There's so many statistics that like if one person has cancer, it affects like 5 other people in some shape or form because of the relations we have with that person. So I can really validate your experience there, Amanda, because it just really creates that awareness that, whoa, like life is like really precious. And like, there's always a chance of being unwell, and to be healthy is such a blessing, right? Like people always say like health is wealth. And I really believe that as much as well. So to be aware of our health means we have to put a lot of energy and time into maintaining well-being. And again, in one of my points here, I was going to bring up that idea is that having serious illness previously, like your own self personally, or having a close family member to be quite ill, creates a lot of fear and worry. So yeah, and I see some more people joining the chat, like, hello, welcome. Feel free to ask any questions as we go along. But I really wanted to focus most of the live today around like some tips on how to best manage anxiety or health anxiety specifically, because I think a lot of the time with anxiety, Carl Jung said, there's no way over something. The only way over it is through it. And he came from a time in the 40s and stuff where it was very direct. And I appreciate that to some degree, because anxiety really needs to be conquered with some tangible tips, tangible strategies, a direct approach. So if we may, we'll maybe start along with our first tip of around health anxiety. So the first tip would be is like to educate and understand your anxiety symptoms. So what I mean by that is that we all, if we experience health anxiety, our anxiety health symptoms are all going to be a little bit different because we may have different fears. So for example, for me, it was a fear of like, if I get a needle, I'm going to not be okay. Or if, like something like that, right? So my fear, my obsessive thinking was like every time I knew I had to get a blood test, I'd be like, okay, what am I going to do to make sure I'm okay? Like, what's my plan? And like really trying to like think about that fear. But it depends on what you fear. So for the cancer example, your health anxiety symptoms may really stem in the thoughts and experiences around cancer. So you might notice that your anxiety increases if you watch a movie if somebody is sick with cancer, like you might get triggered or you might notice that association. So it's really important to understand like what your specific symptoms of anxiety may be, because there's a theme to them. They're all fear of some shape or form or uncomfortableness around health, like your body and whatnot, but everyone might experience their health anxiety differently. And I think it's really important to have acceptance that anxiety is extremely powerful. Our brains are extremely powerful. And what I mean by that is unconsciously or sometimes consciously, our anxiety will create symptoms that are solely coming from the anxiety experience. And there may not actually be something wrong physiologically with our body. Do I mean we should never go to the doctor and never take care of our health? No, of course not. We should always try and take care of ourselves. But I think it's important to understand and have acceptance that from immense amount of stress and anxiety, our body can produce uncomfortable, weird symptoms. And that would be reasonable. And it's kind of like that psychosomatic piece. It's like we think we might have something or we may not, and it produces in our body. Like I said earlier, like a family member had COVID recently. So I was like, oh, do I have a fever? Do I have a sore throat? Like constantly that checking, right? And so within health anxiety, we can have some common symptoms. And that common symptoms might be like that constant worrying about your health. So that would be like, am I well? Am I not well? How am I doing? How's my body? And it might also be like that frequently checking your body for irregularities. So it's like, is this mole okay? Or is this looking right? Is this in the realm of normal? Or just that constant checking of ourselves, like, and it's almost checking in too much. So it's kind of ironic because a great skill for anxiety to manage it is mindfulness, like checking in and being settled and being grounded. But over checking in an obsessive way can have the counter effect. It can make us really hypervigilant and uncomfortable. Another symptom of health anxiety might be that we're worrying that a doctor's test may have missed something. So I've had some clients in the past talk about this idea that I just feel really unheard by my family doctor. I feel as though they haven't been able to adequately check my symptomologies. I feel like they've missed things in their tests. They haven't done a good job. And so that is also a common thing that may come up as well. And it's kind of hard because the anxiety piece will go, well, of course they missed something. Humans make mistakes. It'll create this whole case as to why that is really valid and true. And so I always tell individuals with health anxieties that if you're worried that your doctor hasn't done a great job, I think the second opinion would be fair, right? To a certain extent. And a third opinion is kind of verging on maybe unnecessary. And a fourth opinion is way too many. So I think like a second opinion is really reasonable to have that second check. And if they're in line with with their opinions or their outcome or diagnosis or information, then it's showing some consistency, right? Reliability in the tests. Another thing is a symptom of health anxiety would be always asking for reassurance that you aren't sick. I definitely did that recently. I'm like, I think I'm okay. Like, I think I don't have Miss Rona. I think it's okay. Like, I think I won't be sick. Right. And I'm looking for that reassurance because I really wanted, again, to show up professionally and ready to go for my role. And so I always wanted people to reassure me that it was going to be okay and whatnot. So Another symptom might be is that you might feel as though you might limit your activities since you think you're sick. So you might end up like withdrawing or not doing as much because you feel like you could be sick. And so you should rest, even though there may not actually be any physiological symptoms happening. And you might also, like I said earlier, you might also misinterpret your anxiety symptoms as physiological illness. And another one in the age of the internet, I think we've all been there, like doom scrolling on WebMD, and we're obsessively checking the internet for information. So we might be always checking our symptoms, be like, oh, I have that, or I must have that. Like this experience in my body that I'm having must mean I have this diagnosis. And then this diagnosis means I'm going to like die tomorrow, right? It's like this quick thinking or really negative outcome. And so we have to also kind of, what we need to do is categorize these symptoms into a result of fear or fact seeking. And so fear means that we usually restrict our behavior to keep ourselves safe. So for example, not doing activities, or we're constantly like not engaging in certain ways. But fact seeking is when we want to seek out information. So that's our checking our body or checking the internet for information. And so it's also good to acknowledge that these symptoms will either fall in one of those two categories and to be aware of when each of them are happening. Is this behavior a result of fact seeking, checking with the body, checking for information, or is this a result of fear, like not engaging or having uncomfortable thoughts and feelings? So if we move along to tip number 2, what we want to do as a good way to manage health anxiety is to keep notes of our symptoms of health anxiety and how often we are checking our body or the internet for information and symptoms. So I know this seems kind of redundant, but when we are aware of how often we're checking, we can kind of tangibly, numerically keep track of how many times we're doing it. And then we can try and mindfully go, you know what? I've already checked my body today twice, once because I really needed to, and twice just to get that confirmation. I think I've checked my body enough today. So I'm going to try my best to stop after that number, right? And so we're limiting it. So we're limiting our time and distress that we're experiencing in that space of checking and constantly seeking our body and the internet for information. And that might be really hard to do. So we might need to pair it with like something soothing, like deep breathing, or another healthy behavior like exercise or reading, or something that can kind of get our mind off things. Because if we can be aware of how many times we're doing something, we can try and limit that as well. If we go along to tip number 3, so we want to challenge the anxious thoughts and give arguments as to why it could be untrue. So I'm just going to be kind of silly for a second. It's like, say you have a headache, and then your anxiety then manifested that this headache must mean I have a brain tumor and therefore I'm going to be unwell and die. And I'm not saying that anytime you have a headache, that means like there's nothing ever bad could happen. I'm not saying that, but most of the time, right? If we have a headache is a really normal human experience. And so we want to challenge that thought that that headache equals like something really wrong with our brains and then into death, right? Like we want to challenge that quick acceleration into the really negative outcomes. So I always like to say to people, close your eyes and imagine if that anxious thought was on trial. What are the arguments for and against that anxious thought? So for anxious thought is, yes, you have a headache, and a headache has a purpose in your body. It's doing something, it's providing something for your body. It may force you into doing a more healthy behavior. Maybe you have a headache because you're dehydrated, and maybe that's a good thing to maybe get some more water. Versus when we challenge and go like, okay, what is a headache? What do we really know about it? What information do I actually have that shows that I'm actually really sick and really unwell and sick at death's door, right? We really want to tease it apart. And sometimes it's helpful just to write these things out, pros and cons against this thought. What are the costs and benefits of this thought? Like, and having acceptance that this anxiety is trying to keep you well, it's trying to keep you safe, but it needs to be more of an understanding that just because we have a symptom does not always mean you're unwell. And this is where we have to go back to like that first tip was like, accept that the power of anxiety has. Anxiety will do everything it can to be that lawyer, to be that prosecutor that says, no, now. You are unwell and you need to believe it as such, because the experience of anxiety is so true and valid and intense that it's going to create that need for us to believe that we're unwell. But we have to really step into the logic portion of our brain and go like, what do we know contrary to the prosecution on the defense that this does not mean we are unwell? So really that challenging of the anxious thoughts and giving arguments to yourself as to why it could be untrue. And the other thing is, with those arguments that are going to be saying that it's not true, do your best to try and be mindful that they have value within itself, and you don't need to minimize the value that argument has. That just because it's a headache does not mean it's going to be something really terrible, or headaches are really normal experiences, etc. Like, allow them to rest and allow yourself to go slowly through that process. If you go through it too quickly, you won't get to be able to experience the helpful weight of each of those arguments. Going along to number 4. So this one's huge, and I'm sorry to be a little forceful on you guys, but we really need to just take care of our well-being in general. Like, this is so important, and you guys already probably know this, but we really need to try and participate in healthy activities such as good diet, exercise, and sleep. I think that's just like so crucial, because if we're starting from a good base, we're less likely to experience anxiety overall, because we're feeling really at ease within our body. We're feeling a lot of health. We're feeling a lot of balance. And so I've had many clients go, I've just had a really hard week. And I go, okay, well, what's going on for you? And they're like, well, I do have to acknowledge that, like, I stayed up till 2 a.m. last night. I didn't sleep very well. And like, I didn't have a good diet this week. I really missed on getting the nutrition that I needed. And so I'm like, okay, well, do you feel like some of the interpersonal challenges or work challenges you've had this week, do you feel as though maybe you could tolerate them more effectively if you were regulating your physical health from those base points? And they're like, you know what? Like, I acknowledge that. Like, I need to take responsibility that for me to feel well, I need to have a routine. I was jokingly complaining with someone recently. I was like, I wish we just had more time in many ways, because I feel like 80% of the time we're just doing things for maintenance, whether it's like working, sleeping, eating, exercising, cleaning, grocery shopping, cooking, like the list goes on, right? Taking care of our families or children, etc. Like, there's so much that goes on into maintaining well-being. And I wish we had more time to enjoy wonderful things. But if we don't take care of ourselves, that's where a lot of our dysregulation is going to come from. And then it's going to be very easy for our minds to step into that experience of health anxiety, because we may not be really getting our base wellness happening at that time regardless, right? So do the best that you can. And I really like to say to people, you don't have to be perfect, right? Like, you don't have to be perfect in those things. But even if you do a little bit of like diet, exercise, sleep to a good degree, that's going to even just have a huge impact. And that might be like a 15-minute walk regularly, or just at least trying to get 7 hours of sleep on a regular basis, or sleeping in if you have the opportunity, or like grabbing a glass of water if you can. Things like that are just going to make a huge difference. And so sometimes we always get stuck into that uncomfortable loop of the health anxiety, but it's also the preventative measures of like good well-being overall. Number 5. So we want to try to change our attention in another direction. So that would be like moving our body, cleaning, getting things done off your to-do list, coloring, reading, watching a show. Sometimes it's just so important to recognize that we need a little bit of relief and distraction in a helpful, healthy way, to allow ourselves a reprieve from that rumination, that circling of thoughts, that constant checking of our bodies or searching for information. So that would be a really good one. Amit says like that he finds that it works really well for him to participate in healthy activities, just not to have huge expectations and just to start simple. Sometimes I only expect myself to spend 10 minutes outside. That is really wonderful. And that really highlights the idea that you don't have to be perfect. Create some manageable goals, realistic goals that you can actually maintain. Like for me, I try and go for a walk regularly. I thankfully have a puppy that forces me to get out for a walk. But sometimes if I can't do a full hour walk, I'm like, you know what? 15 minutes is still something. And that's still 15 minutes of movement that is great to do for my body. It still increased my heart rate for a few minutes. It allowed me to feel grounded, clear my mind a little bit. And it just created a different experience for that day. And so I also go, okay, well, when's the best time? Like in the summer, it's super, super hot out. So I find going earlier in the morning is best because I'm not sweating too deep much then. It's more pleasant and a good, better experience. Or after dinner when it cools off a bit is a better time as well. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And so going back to like changing our attention in another direction, it's like, I think it's also important to do things that we enjoy. Like what are our hobbies or things that we like to do that keep us happy, to make us feel as though we're experiencing life in a good way? What are those things, and really participate in that? And distraction doesn't change the fact that we are experiencing health anxiety. It gives us a bit of reprieve, and it allows us to step out of that emotional state back into a more logical state and see our health anxiety differently. So number 6 is be specific in what we're fearing. So often we tell ourselves really grandiose tales of our fears, but if we try and limit to a specific fear, we can thereby more likely be able to manage it. So this goes back to this idea that anxiety catapults us, straps us in, catapults us so far into the future where everything is on fire, we're dying, and everyone's bleeding out. I'm teasing, obviously that may not be everyone's fear, but that is that grandiose idea that everything is bad so far in the future. So let's try and break it down. If we have health anxiety, what are we specifically fearing in that? What is the illness or concern that we actually have? Or why do we not feel safe and secure in our bodies right at this time? Or what is not going the way that we would like to be going in our lives at this time? And so when we really try and limit it down and tell ourselves true things, one thing at a time, versus these untrue, grandiose, big narratives about how everything's bad, it's going to be a lot more tangible. So I'll give you an example. Say I enjoy sitting outside in the sun, and it's really normal to have a mole, from sitting in the sun. That would be really, really normal to have a little beauty mark, right? So for example, I'm teasing myself. I'm like, oh, like, is this mole bigger or smaller than it was before? Which means I must have melanoma, which means I'm going to die really early in my life, and it's going to just be awful. And everyone's going to be so suffering because of it. Like da, 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 this big grandiose thing. But it's like, wait, what do I actually factually know? Which is kind of a fun rhyme. What do we actually factually know? I actually know that moles are normal to get as part of being in the sunshine. That is very normal to have that happen. And I also factually know that we can follow the ABCDs of moles. That is it dysregular? Is it changing? Is it asymmetrical? Or I can't remember all of them. Like, is it weird colors? Is it changing? If I can follow that knowledge that is based in science around moles, that can now go, okay, is this a mole that's unhelpful and actually dangerous and unhealthy? Or is it just a regular mole from sitting in the sunshine in the summer, right? So we need to really tell ourselves truths instead of the catapulting into the far future. So the other thing that is really important about that is we need to lean into like science and knowledge and let the specialists tell us what's up. Like I am not as a skin doctor or dermatologist, but I going to learn from science to tell myself what is true and what is real versus what is my narration of my experience. And I'm not trying to say that we should minimize what we feel. Fear is real and fear is valid. But when fear turns into telling ourselves big, grandiose lies, that's where it's not really unhelpful. So we will honor the fear, and then we need to turn into the logic and facts and science and knowledge about what is true and what is false, right? And also then we can go, well, what could we do about that? Right. So that could be like, okay, I'm going to go see a doctor and I'm going to let them measure my mole and make sure it's okay. Or I'm going to take pictures of it and keep information on hand to see if it does change and like kind of watch out and see if maybe like a couple of hours later, do I still feel that same intensity of anxiety around my mole, for example? This is just an example, but I think it's all relatable because we all can get moles. So the next one for number 7 is I think it's really important to normalize that our bodies do weird things. And I say weird because they're kind of like comical. Like it's normal for your stomach to make gurgling noises, or it's normal that like a sneeze might come out weird, or it's normal that like makes me sound so old, but like I bent down and my knees cracked and it sounded like I was 90 years old instead of not being in my 90s. Like that is normal. Like it is reasonable that my body will do weird things, because I know it sounds really gross, but this body that I habitate in, my soul lives in, is biological. Like it is a collection of all of these billions and trillions of cells all working together to give me this form, right? And so it would be normal for some of those cells to produce some weird symptoms or weird things on occasion, that because of the way that they function, right? We have to think about all of the different internal systems, our digestive system, our skin system, our nervous system, our endocrine system, our circulatory system, all of these different parts working together to provide me a body to live in, right? And so I think it's really important to normalize this idea that we do weird things. And so that's why I always think it's fun sometimes to joke with friends like, oh yeah, I bent over yesterday to pick something up and my knees cracked, right? So like, and then we can laugh about it because they will probably relate to that experience, that it's normal that in certain situations we do weird things. And not everything that our body does in those weird symptoms or experiences means that we're sick. Like I'll give another silly example. It's like I had a pain in my stomach and I was like, oh my goodness, I mean, it must mean that I have appendicitis, right? So again, I've catapulted so far into the future where I have a diagnosis of appendicitis and I have to get my appendix removed. It's like, no, like that pain in my stomach could just be indigestion. It could be a variety of other options. So let's put that on trial, pros and cons for that thoughts, costs and benefits of that thoughts, arguments against that thought, and also go that, have I had a pain in my stomach before? Yes, I have eaten too much ice cream, for example, or whatever else, and I've had a pain in my stomach, and that would be really normal. So I think it's important to maybe share how you're feeling with other people and allow them to go, yeah, like that sounds normal, or be like that quality check for you that different weird symptomology happens, and that's okay. Number 8. So number 8 would be a tip for you guys would be, see if you can avoid health-related news, especially when you're feeling really anxious or you're already not having a good time. A lot of stress is happening. So if you're in a dysregulated, distressed state. And the reason I say that is because if you think about it, I talked about this before, the window of tolerance in a previous YouTube live, is like, we can only tolerate so much. So if we're already at a heightened state and then we see some weird news, right? We're going to be like a lot less likely to tolerate that news about health or the world or whatever else. And it's going to feel more intense to us. So I think it's important to recognize that. Why are we looking for information? And are we looking for information in a helpful way or an unhelpful way? What is the purpose of the information? I don't mean that we have to put blinders on and then go live in the forest and never communicate or have any other information ever touch us again. I mean, it's like being mindful of like, why are we searching for information? Am I in a balanced state where I can take in health related information, such as like pandemic or diseases or this or that, whatever it may be? Can I accept that information in a logical state? Or am I in a dysregulated, very emotional state and therefore can't tolerate it? So I would really recommend just being mindful of how you're feeling, what's going on, and going, am I in a good state to do as such, right? Because like, if you think about it, there's so many things that could tangibly go wrong with a person's body. Like I said, we're a collection of different systems and there's so many opportunities for things to go wrong in our bodies. But just because someone else is unwell does not mean that we are unwell, or an experience that's happening in a different part of the world does not mean that you are having that experience right now. That would be very separate. And we're still allowed to, of course, be empathetic and care about the other person's experience, but we have to have that barrier to go that we are not the same as another person's health experience. Number 10. So be present in the moment. Like so often we are thinking so far in the future or so far in the past, like with my teasing myself about having a needle, like thinking about that experience where things have gone wrong, or thinking so far into the future where I'm unhealthy and I'm going to die in a split second, right? It's so important to be present in the moment, that right now I'm just giving some information on health anxiety. Everything's okay. In this present moment, it's sunny out. It's a good day. I'm feeling healthy technically. Like if I just quickly check in, nothing's going wrong. And that experience is more manageable, taking it moment by moment instead of the past or the present experiences, right? Because we can't tell what's going to happen in the future, but we can also reconceptualize the way things have happened in the past. And number 11, I think it's really important to think about well-being as multifaceted. So what I mean by that is we have our biological well-being, like our bodies, health, diet, sleep, exercise, all of that. We have our psychological health, like how our mind is doing. We have our social health, like our social circles. But I also believe that we have this aspect of spiritual health as well. And what I mean by that is it can be spiritual in the way that we think of, can see the word spiritual. It could be religious as well. It doesn't have to be, but it might also just be our belief systems that we hold. So sometimes the reason we have so much health anxiety is we have this fear of death and dying. And that is a valid fear because there's nothing that we can do. That will be an outcome that we all experience one day. And that is really unfortunate that we will no longer be present in the world. But I think that it's helpful to find a belief that you can resonate with about what your experience of moving on past this life might be like, and have some peace within that, because then we can create a less fearful outcome. So for my example, I really like to think about physics, about this idea that energy is neither created nor destroyed. So in some way, the energy that I have within my body and soul ideally will be part of the world in another way, right? And that gives me a lot of peace about, like, heaven forbid the day that I do pass on, right? So I think it's really important to find an idea or a belief that you connect with that allows to minimize or reconceptualize that experience of death and dying differently. And it kind of taps into like the whole grief and grieving kind of methodologies. But I think sometimes it's really important to have more of a connection with some of your beliefs and ideas. Because if you really think about it, this is a bit of into existentialism. We all have different beliefs and ideas about why there is humanity. I don't know if you guys saw recently in the news, they had smart like scientists, I can't think of astrologists and things like that. They took pictures of other galaxies that happened like billions of years ago. I thought that was really cool, because the way that light travels and everything, that we're experiencing it so much later. But what they showed was that there's other galaxies out there and that we can in those pictures. And so if you really think about it, we all need to think of a reason why our lives and our life experience is worth experiencing. You know, like we need to have a connection to an idea or a belief system of some sort. For me, I really appreciate like trying to be helpful for others in the field of mental health. I really believe that having good experiences personally, and those are the beliefs that really give me a connection to my life in the world. And so sometimes when other people are sick, if we look at it, go, you know, I feel for them and I have empathy for their experience that they may be sick, but this is an experience that is valid and true. And I know that unfortunately sickness is part of the way that the world has balance. We could say that as well. Without light, there is no dark. Without no good, there is no bad. Like we can't have one or the other. Many times when I see clients, they go, I just want to be happy. And I'm like, that's great. But like, what percentage of the time? Because if you were happy 100% of the time, you wouldn't even realize you're happy because you'd have no comparison and it would probably just get really boring. It wouldn't be as entertaining or as exciting. So those would be some 11 tips for you guys regarding health anxiety. Feel free to ask any questions. I'm going to think for a second if there's any other kind of stuff that I think would be helpful for showing up. But I think, again, to kind of summarize some of these ideas is that I think it's really important to recognize the symptoms of health anxiety, right? What are your symptoms? What are the checking, the worrying, the rumination, the constant thoughts, and uncomfortable sensations you have in your body? Right? Creating beliefs for yourself that are going to guide you in a positive way, and recognizing and seeing if you can try and connect where that health anxiety was born from, and then go, well, does that experience then mean that I'm unwell? Right? I think that's a really big question to answer. And again, kind of going through these tips. So understand your own health anxiety and your own anxiety symptoms, keeping track and a log of your well-being and your symptomology, and try and limit the number of times you're checking. Try and take care of your base health, right? Sleep, exercise, diet, do things that you enjoy, right? Make life feel like a worth living for you so that it's not this constant experience of health anxiety. Try and be really specific in what you're fearing, right? Am I fearing this one illness, or am I fearing like all of death and dying, or is it like specific ones within that? Be really like normalize your body, and that we're like a collection of cells and it's normal for our body to do weird things. Like I bet if I do this with my hand, I could crack it, and that would be weird, but does not mean my wrist is unwell. Like it's normal to have aches and bumps and bruises and weird things happen. Understand your own specific cycle of health anxiety, really be present in the moment, and just kind of really think about like, how could I experience this differently? I'll give a couple client examples to wrap up things as well. But I had one client had an experience of health anxiety, and they remember that they went to the doctor because they felt like they were having a hard time breathing in a regular way, and they felt like their heart rate was really irregular. And the doctor said, well, you could have this really rare heart condition, or you could just have some stress. So that was like two really big things of like, and from that experience of her in her early adulthood and then later in life, she was like, whoa, how could that doctor plant such a big fear of mine that I could have like this really serious heart condition versus might just be an irregularity because of the stress I've been experiencing in my life. So from that moment, she was able to conceptualize that experience created a lot of the fear for her. And so for us in that treatment plan, we went through some EMDR, went through some desensitization and reprocessing of that experience. And it really minimized a lot of her health anxiety because it allowed her to see that experience as not an overall overcasting of her whole life. And instead, it was just one experience, and all the follow-up tests showed that she was okay, and she could really trust that information. Sarah's saying in the chat that she's found it's really just helpful to keep track of things that are normal for her body. And that really helps a lot. I think that's a really great idea too. Definitely. Like I've noticed that if I recognize I have certain cycles, even just as a woman in the way that I experience things, that also means that I have some symptomologies that are going to be cyclical for me. And that's normal too, as well. So keeping track of it is really wonderful too. In terms of like how to best treat health anxiety, in terms of like the counseling aspect or treatments, I think it's really important to maybe consider like cognitive behavioral therapy is really great for health anxiety. If you look through the trauma-informed lens, I really am a big fan of EMDR would be really great. I think it's also really important to maybe consider narrative therapy. So that would be like in the way that you describe your life and changing the narrative to be something more helpful. Or it may be really great de-stressing techniques or stress management, or dialectical behavioral therapy would be great. And so basically I'm just listing off a bunch, but in that idea that there are a lot of ways to manage it. And if you do need that support, it is available for you. And so sometimes the first step is to, like I said, go at that health anxiety bang on, straight on, and really go like, what can I tangibly do about it to minimize and decrease the intensity of the experience I'm having? So yeah, that would be some really great ones as well. So yeah, that was kind of like the main points that I had for everyone today. Hopefully those were some helpful ones. Feel free to ask me more questions. I'd love to answer anything that you guys may have or anything that's come up for you. But yeah, hopefully there's some tangible tips that you guys can implement to have some more like help and like some more balance within your health anxiety. It's something that definitely I've had here and there. I tease myself for it because I know it's a really irrational. I know I'm healthy, but I am really good at concocting irrational tales in my mind about how I'm unwell sometimes at certain moments. So it's really important for me to rely on my own personal health related skills and strategies and routines. And just, I sometimes conquer it with a little bit of humor as well, because I think that helps to rationalize it too. So yeah, it's been really great kind of sharing all this information. Feel free to ask any other questions, but those are kind of like the main kind of tips and things I had for everyone today. Oh, and Amanda was sharing here that another tip that really helped her was not to Google everything you feel. I think that's great, because just because you feel something does not mean it's a full-blown symptom into some sort of disease, syndrome, or illness. So that's a really great one. Google is a very deep hole, I would say that. And sometimes too much information is not helpful. So that's a great one as well. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions coming through. I appreciate everyone joining today. Hopefully, these are helpful, but feel free to reach out. I'm accepting new clients in BC, Canada. If anyone's looking to work with me, Switch Research has wonderful workbooks and journals on well-being that can be really helpful too. And again, just even working on yourself for a couple minutes every day of something healthy for yourself is going to make a world of difference. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday and looking forward to chatting with you guys another time.